I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed. This is actually a Data Exposed exclusive. We're here live at the PASS Data Community Summit in Seattle, Washington, if you've been tuning in. We're back with Raj, actually. And Raj, this time, what are you going to talk about?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about cloud-connected scenarios with SQL Server 2022, so that how you can really leverage these capabilities to build a true hybrid solution with SQL Server 2022.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this is definitely everything we're all really excited to hear. Azure connected, cloud connected with SQL Server 2022, all the cool stuff that comes with it. You're going to do some great demos, so let's get right into it.
Yep, thank you. I'm very excited. Hello everyone, welcome to the session SQL Server 2022 Cloud Connected. And my name is Raj Pochiraju, and I'm a Principal Program Manager in Azure Data. In today's keynote address, we released the SQL Server 2022 for general availability, which is very exciting. And now in this session, we are going to go a little more deeper into the specific cloud connected scenarios that would really help you to establish a true hybrid workloads in your environments. So if you look at all the cloud connected scenarios that we got, you will see all those capabilities in a single slide here. Let's talk about one at a time. With the SQL Server Managed Instance MI link, you can really now outsource your disaster recovery solution to the cloud. Right? You can really establish a new disaster recovery in the cloud using the MI link. That really help you to fail back to the on-premises environment as well. And this is one of the top asks that our customers have been asking. I got migrated to managed instance, but give me an ability that I can be able to restore the database back to the on-premises environment, right? Now it is possible. Then, without really doing a complex ETL jobs, you can really run the real-time analytics on the cloud using the Azure Synapse link. And doing a ETL job is very complex and expensive. Now you don't have to do anything. It is seamlessly built-in integrated into SQL Server 2022 engine. And then using the Microsoft Purview, you can really govern and protect your SQL servers. You can really create the policies and as well as publish those policies to on-premises environment as well. So that way you will have a consistent policy management across your cloud assets and as well as the on-premises environments. And then now you can really integrate Azure Active Directory to the on-premises SQL Server 2022 or the SQL servers which are running anywhere outside of the Azure. Previously, Azure Active Directory is only available for the databases which are created in the cloud. Now you can really integrate that into the SQL Server 2022 outside of the Azure so that you can have a single sign-on and multi-phase authentication as well. Now, you can really secure your SQL Server environment by integrating with the Microsoft Defender. So the Defender, originally a cloud service, now we extend the reach of the Defender to the SQL servers which are running outside of Azure so that you can really use it to secure and protect your SQL servers. And all you need is that for these capabilities to really enable, few simple things that we need to do. You need to enable SQL Server 2022 Arc Enable, which we talked about in the previous session, where you are connecting your SQL Server 2022 with the cloud using the Arc enablement. And then we are going to be installing self-hosted integration runtime in your on-premises environment to really have this data synchronization as well. So these are the features that are really going to help you to really build a true hybrid business cases or true hybrid workloads using SQL Server 2022 and below. Let's go a little deep into each one of these scenarios basically. Let me first talk about the business continuity through Azure Managed Instance. Like I said, you can really use the managed instance which is running on the Azure as your disaster recovery solution, right? That is made possible through managed instance. The technology that is being used for doing this is availability groups and distributed availability groups. And you might know The availability groups and distributed availability groups is not something new. This has been there for SQL Server 2012 and above. But the thing is, in order to really establish a disaster recovery high availability solution in the on-premises or the SQL servers which are running on the outside of the Azure, then it is you got to set up and you have to manage. That's very complex actually. Now you don't have to worry about it. All you are going to say that I got my SQL server which is running outside of the Azure, and then now I want to really make a managed instance as a disaster recovery solution for me. We create availability groups for you, and we create distributed availability groups for you, and then we make that replication possible seamlessly. So that's one advantage that with the MI link that we recently released, right? Not only that, you can really do an offline disaster recovery as well, and now you can really fail back to the on-premises and back and forth, and then you can really restore your on-premises SQL Server MI database back to the, you can restore the managed instance database back to the on-premises environment as well. So that way it is kind of two-fold, right? Or a two-fold solution for you. Now let's look at the demo, how you can really leverage managed instance link to establish a disaster recovery. So just to let you know that this is a recorded video for the sake of the time, I'm going to walk through this experience basically. Now this demo is going to show you how to really establish a disaster recovery between the on-premises environment and as well as the managed instance. So as you see here, I have the SQL Server 2022 instance which is running outside of Azure, and I also have a managed instance, and I have a database called Wide World Importers. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to establish a replication using a simple wizard experience in Management Studio, which you all know how to use it, right? And then in the next step, you're going to be selecting the specific database where you want to establish as an MI link. And then now it is, you need to sign into the Azure portal to make sure that you select the managed instance. So I selected my managed instance over there. And then in the next step, you see that there is a summary where the availability groups are already created for you. You don't have to create availability groups. You just provide the names over there. We will create the availability groups and as well as the distributed availability groups. So now I'm going to hit a finish button there so that it's going to establish the replication between your on-premises environment and as well as the managed instance. Now, if you look at the Management Studio, you will see both availability groups and the distributed availability groups are already created, and database is in more of a synchronization mode. And I'm going to pause a little bit and take some time. So you might have, you have a question?
Yes, sir. So the availability groups are created on the primary too. We don't have to create.
I'm sorry?
The availability groups are created on the primary. We don't have to create.
You don't have to create anywhere. It's just automatically being created by the wizard experience, basically. Yeah, so do I need to create a primary, do I need to create availability groups in the primary and secondary, right? The answer is no, you don't have to. The wizard experience itself is going to be creating the availability groups and distributed availability groups for you. You just need to give the names for it. We also give you the built-in name. In case if you want to change the name, you can do it. But otherwise, it is just next, next, next. That's how the experience is really created, right? So in order to do all this, I know how many DBAs spent hours together to make availability groups to work and troubleshoot when they really fail. Now it is all seamless actually, right? Now let's see that. So I'm going to be looking at the status of the availability groups or the replication here. I'm going to run few queries on both the primary and as well as the secondary. And you see that the primary is the SQL Server, which is running outside of Azure, and then read-write mode. And then you got a version number 957. Remember that because that is the same version that will be created on the secondary as well, which is a managed instance. And you see that there is a managed instance which is running here, and then read-only purposes, and then 957. So here is another. So basically, when you create an availability group using the MI link, you're not only creating a disaster recovery solution, but also you can really outsource some of your read workloads to managed instance, because you can really read the managed instance which is sitting on the cloud, right? Now what I'm doing is I'm going to run some few queries. Basically, I'm going to create the table like a vehicles table, And then I'm also going to create some vehicles stock items table on the primary. And then we will see how these tables and table content is going to get replicated to the managed instance. Yeah, so these are the specific tables I talked about, the vehicles and as well as the vehicle stock items. I populated on the primary instance, and now we are going to go to the managed instance and going to query that to see if these are replicated already. So now the insert is happened. Now I'm going to connect to the managed instance, which is your disaster recovery site, and this is a read-only database. I'm going to execute the query here just to find out. Yes, this is the managed instance that I have got connected. Now you see that the vehicles are already populated there. The stock is populated. So it is instantaneous. Instantaneous. Hold on a second. I'm going to come back to you. So you have a question? Yeah?
What about listeners? Is it going to be automatically configured too?
Right. Is the listeners are automatically going to be created? Yes, you can provide an endpoint.
So when you create a listener, it's automatically created. So applications automatically will read to the secondary.
Yes.
If it's a read-only.
Yes, if you want to really read the secondary copies, you will really give you the secondary instance information, basically. When you say secondary in the connection string, it will automatically go to the secondary, the intent. When you provide an intent that I want to read the, read intent, then it will go to the secondary. Now what I'm doing is I'm just initiating a failover now. Let's do a failover. Let's simulate a failover actually, right? And this is a planned failover that I'm simulating right now. Of course, you got to log into the Azure before you start the failover and make sure that the application workload is stopped so that no connections are happening. And then just click next. And there is an option here that you can also delete availability groups if you want to, because you are already failing over. And if you don't really need availability groups anymore, you can delete them as well. So this is how simple it is to do a failover, right? Especially if you are really applying the patches and all the stuff, you can really use that. You can really establish a disaster recovery site to the managed instance, and then you fail over to the managed instance, and then you apply all your updates to the SQL Server, and then you can re-establish the disaster recovery. Now the managed instances become as read and write intent because you failed over, right? So that's kind of concludes the demo, how you can really leverage managed instance to create a disaster recovery solution on the cloud. Let's talk about the Azure Synapse Link. So now, a lot of customers, what they're doing is, if they cannot really migrate the existing operational databases, operational stores to Azure, they are first starting with outsourcing their business intelligence data stores to the cloud, right? For doing that, traditionally customers needs to create a lot of the ETL jobs. And these ETL jobs are very complex and as well as error prone. And troubleshooting ETL jobs will take very, very long time. So you don't have to do any of that stuff anymore. Without doing any complex ETL jobs, you can really use the Synapse Link for SQL Server to feed the changes that are happening to your operation database to Azure Synapse. And it is very instantaneous. You can really do a real-time synchronization with the Synapse. So you can really run your real-time analytics on the cloud while your operation databases are still hosted outside of the Azure, right? And the way it works is that you see that your on-premises databases which are sitting outside of the Azure here, and then you have your Synapse workspace here, right? You create SQL Server dedicated pools that you want to really use as an analytical store. And then all you do is you create a linked service for SQL Server on the Synapse workspace, pointing to my SQL Server source is coming from the on-premises environment. So you have to create a linked source. Once you create that, it will ask you to download the self-hosted integration runtime that you don't have to install on the SQL Server box itself. You can install any on-premises machine which has a direct line of sight with the SQL Server, right? you can use a runtime host to connect to multiple SQL servers as well. That way you can really scale. So you install runtime host and then register the runtime host with the Synapse link that you just the link that you created over there, right? Once that is done, you also need to create a landing zone which is going to use ADLS Gen2 storage. So it is going to use the intermittent data storage. It will be used as an intermittent data storage for the change feed, right? So these are the major components that are going to be involved in setting up a Synapse link. Now, at first there will be a schema, and as well as the data Parquet files will be moved to the Azure using the ADLS link, and then from there you will have an ingression service which is running in the cloud, and that will really ingress all that data into your Azure pools, and from there onwards, any changes that are going to be happening to your SQL Server data, the change feed continuously gets feed into the ADLS storage, and then the ingression service will insert those information into the cloud. So it's a continuous process. It's a continuous process. So the change feed routines, the change feed algorithms and routines are built into the SQL Server 2022 itself. They are the part of the engine. They're not outside components. That's the reason we gained the performance and we can be able to do the real-time analytics using the Synapse link. So that's the main reason why we can be able to achieve that. Now let's focus on security. How can the cloud connected experiences are going to help you to secure and protect your SQL servers? We talked about Azure Active Directory authentication. Now you can really configure your SQL servers with Azure Active Directory authentication to have a centralized authentication mechanism for all the assets which are running outside of Azure and as well as the assets running on the Azure, right? You can really have a single sign-on mechanism and also multi-facet authentication as well. And then Azure Purview. Azure Purview service is going to really help you to protect, govern your data and get more insights from the data, which includes the inventory and as well as the classification of the data. And also it really helps you to establish a role-based authentication with your SQL Server 2022. That means you can be able to create a policy which you can really use to grant permissions and privileges to a logins without even creating the logins. So basically you can use Azure Active Directory logins and then you kind of control the access from the cloud without accessing to your SQL Server instance at all. You don't have to run the T-SQL commands or anything. You can just simply create a policy and the policy can be applied to SQL Server 2022 at scale. So that's the beauty of having these cloud services connected together for you. And then Microsoft Defender, which continuously scans across your SQL Server environment and find out if there are any vulnerabilities or any attacks that are happening. And it also identifies the risk set proactively and then provide you the mitigation steps. And at times it will auto-mitigate for you. Just one click, your risk is mitigated. Where we cannot really do that kind of automation, then we will provide you the steps how to really mitigate a particular security item that is being reported. So that way you can really protect your SQL Server in 360 degrees view, right? Let me show you some demo. Even before I go to the AD demo, so basically if your resource is on cloud, let me expand the whole slide. If your resource is already on the cloud, for example, SQL Server 2022, Azure VM, obviously Azure Active Directory is a native integrated, right? But then now we bring that capability to SQL Server 2022, which is in your on-premises, which is not running in Azure, right? That is enabled for both Windows and as well as the SQL servers which are running on the Linux environment. In both cases, you can really enable that. Let's see that as a demo. So what it really requires to do that is you need to connect your SQL Server to a cloud using the Arc-enabled SQL Server. We talked about Arc-enabled SQL Server in the previous session. So you need to set up Arc-enabled SQL Server. Once you set up Arc-enabled SQL Server, you will see that resource. You can call that as a shadow resource on the cloud. Once you have a resource created on the cloud, then you can really easily extend all the cloud capabilities to that resource. Because we don't really differentiate a resource which is natively created in the cloud and a resource which is connected through Arc. We don't differentiate. We treat both as Azure resources, right? So that way the resource is created here Now you can start integrating the Active Directory authentication. So you have your authentication here. There are only few steps that you need to do. You need to create an Azure principal at first, and then create a certificate key vault, and then attach the certificate to the application ID, and then provide the specific permissions to the application, which are described in a step-by-step guide. That's it. It will really create you the Active Directory connection, and also establish an admin, Active Directory admin. Once you have Active Directory admin established, the admin is going to create the logins into the sysadmin role or any other server role that you have in the SQL Server world, so that users can directly access using just Azure Active Directory. You don't have to create multiple logins or anything anymore. So I already have Rajpo at Microsoft, which is my AD account that I integrated. Now I'm going to go to access to the SQL Server. So this is my SQL Server, which is running outside of the Azure. Okay. Now I'm going to connect to it. Traditionally I can use Windows authentication, right? That's not a surprise. I can also use SQL Server authentication. Beyond that point, now I can start using Active Directory Universal with multi-factor authentication, and as well as using the password. I can use all these other methods that I can log in through Active Directory. So I'm going to choose for this one multi-factor authentication here, and then I'm going to simply connect. At first, it is going to log into the Azure portal for the first time. Just give me a second there. Yep, that's it. So you have a single login, Rajpo at Microsoft.com. You're going to use that login to access all your assets, right? Including your Azure Active Directory, but also accessing the SQL Server. So that way, you will have a single log-on. I'm sorry?
What kind of permission do you have on this? Is it the same permission with your AD? Or
Yeah, so that's a good question. What kind of permissions that I need to have? You need to have some connect permission to the SQL Server. You need to put an appropriate role on the SQL Server roles, right? Again, because it is integrated with the Purview, you don't have to log into the SQL Server. You can really use Purview to define those permissions and assign to these logins directly. So without even logging into your SQL Server, you can really control all this from the cloud.
not a security risk?
No, because the connections and everything happens to Principal, and Principal has the certification behind it, and certification will be stored in the key vault. So there are multiple layers of security being established over there. Yeah. With that, I conclude my demo, and then I'm going to summarize all these findings actually. I'm going to go back my slide deck. Just to give a summary, right? SQL Server 2022 is a true hybrid database server for the first time, with all these seamless cloud-connected experiences built in. Integration with Azure Active Directory, Synapse Link to run your business intelligence on the cloud, and then Purview to really govern, protect your SQL servers, and then Defender to secure your SQL servers, right? So these are all the features are going to be enabling you to really build true hybrid business cases for your applications to begin with. With that, I'm going to conclude my session. There are few sessions that we are going to be going much more deeper in the specific hybrid scenarios. So I want you to take a note and then please visit us. Previous one? Yeah, okay. So then to the end, if you really want to learn about these connected experiences, we provided those AKA links, which are very easy to remember for you. So go and then learn SQL Server 2022 and then start leveraging cloud for securing, managing, and protecting your SQL servers so that you can really spend all your time doing more creative stuff for your business, right? Thank you so much for your time. I'll be staying here for questions as well in case.
Wow, Raj, that was awesome. I especially love the demo and all the questions that you got, and people are just so impressed by the distributed availability group. You know, SQL Server 2022 is GA now.
Yep.
So what's the call to action for folks to
Call
go
to
try
action
out
for,
these?
I kind of mentioned in the slide where we gave some kind of AKA links, and specific videos that they can really watch, and then, get hands-on experience and start implementing some of these capabilities to build the real-time solutions for your workloads.
Awesome, cool. Well, thanks so much, Raj, for coming on the show. To our viewers online, if you like this episode, go ahead and give it a like. Check the description. We'll put all those links for you to learn more. We hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.